Okay, so this time we're going to be looking at this session, inalienable rights, and we can have them regained. But firstly, we need to just orientate and remind ourselves what our inalienable rights are. And the movers and the shakers and the founders of America knew that very clearly, because the Mayflower and the Speedwell took many of the pilgrims out of Europe, where they were being bullied and persecuted and put into jail. And Alexander Hamilton says inalienable rights are not to be rummaged around old parchments or musty records. They are written as with a sunbeam in the whole volume of human nature by the hand of divinity itself, and can never be erased or obscured by mortal power. Okay, we've come a long way, but that is the truth of it. We don't need to rummage around for our inalienable rights. They're ours. They should be shining out. John Dixon, a right which God gave you and which no inferior power, that's government, has the right to take away. Jefferson, nothing is unchangeable but the inherent and inalienable rights of man. So we get up to the 1980s, and let's hear what Reagan had to say. Our natural inalienable rights are now considered to be dispensation from government, and freedom has never been so fragile, so close to slipping away from our grasp as it is at this moment. So that was, 30, 40 years ago, and I suggest to you that it's gone. We have no longer got any grasp on our inalienable rights. We think we have, because we're now living in what's known as liberty, but liberty is a whole different thing than freedom. Freedom we can get about our business. We don't need to lock down. Liberty is what the captain says, and he'll let us off like the dog off a chain. Gets that liberty, then back on the chain. So we have no inalienable rights left. So let's just have a look. This is Sir William Blackstone. He wrote volumes on the laws of nature and nature's God. And in the early days of America, anyone that was anyone knew those works inside out and back to front. The Constitution says about our inalienable rights, the Constitution of America says of our inalienable rights, they're self-evident. So they didn't go, I mean, we've got amendments in there, but they didn't go through it with a fine-tooth comb because it was self-evident. But we've fallen a long way over those 200 or 300 years. So our inalienable right of freedom of speech, that gives us the right to offend someone. Of course, we don't want to do that deliberately, but every time we open our voice, we're going to offend someone. And our voice should be raised up against any governing system that we have, or any authority. We should be able to critique it and speak with our voice. And that is being closed down. We no longer have freedom of speech. Food, that's another one, that we should have the inalienable right to forage, to hunt, to raise our own food, to grow our own food. Today, we're lucky, we're still allowed to have a vegetable garden, but even that is under risk, even here in New Zealand. When you look at United Nations, they give us the right to food, but they don't give us the right to choose what food will be. So we've got a lot of laboratory-made foods in stores right now. We have the right to self-defense. That means we have the right to bear arms, not to be out there causing mayhem, but we have the inalienable right to defend ourselves, our children, and our property. And these rights that I've mentioned thus far are what comes from the law of nature. That's where we find out, well, what can we do and what can't we do? And when Williams wrote his book, he looked at the laws of nature. Animals had the right of free speech, to gain their food and self-defense. But animals also kill each other and eat each other, so that's where the nature's God comes into being. So there's a little bit of understanding needed there, clearly. We're not animals, we're beings made in the image of God. Property. Animals, again, have the right to exist and have that property while they're there, whether it's a hole they dig or a tree they nest in. We have the inalienable right to own property, and that will become more relevant in our next session. Freedom of association. You look at China now, if you have got the wrong Facebook friends or the wrong friends in real life that do not suit the narrative of the regime, you lose your credits. Your children aren't allowed to go to certain schools. You're not allowed to travel. There's no freedom of association. And that is looking more palpable here in New Zealand as well. The freedom to life, well, people say, oh, but when the Constitution, back then, abortion wasn't around. Well, actually it was, and there are writings in early America of that very thing. So when we have that inalienable right to life, that is even before we are born. Now our government are looking to trim us at the front door of life with abortion and at the back door of life with euthanasia. The right to travel. Well, we experienced over the last 2 years or 18 months, 2 years, that right to travel is limited on the liberty that our government will avail of us at any one given time. The right to accumulate, that doesn't fit into the communist model, so they don't want you starting a wee business and prospering in that business and bringing in employees and if you're wanting to earn a fortune, that right to accumulate is now being hammered. If you earn more than a certain amount, you go into a new tax structure. So you're being disciplined as you accumulate more. And that is where socialism and Protestantism is different, where, yes, we can accumulate, but as we are blessed, much is expected. It's not about me, me, me. It's about sharing, but that's you make that decision for yourself. And if you're going to be a, Scrooge, well, so be it. That's your right as well. It's not ideal, but, that's your right. Bodily autonomy, and we're realising, and I think leading into the rest of this year, we'll understand that inalienable right to protect our body and choose what's going to happen to our body is going to fast disappear. They've got mandating officers being trained now. And the pursuit to happiness as well is part of what we would expect as being our inalienable rights. So these are the movers and shakers that are taking our inalienable rights from us. They're all connected. They're the big club, that comedian, it's a club that we don't belong to. And here we've got little Obama. To his right, his mum, and to his left is Melinda Gates' mother. These go back generational. They are grooming the next person that comes along. And I've kind of thought that Ardern, it wouldn't matter if she was a girl or a boy. She was born to be our Prime Minister. She would have been groomed for that. And the reason they have taken over these ideas that they can decree from on high and we have to jump through their hoops is an Aristotelian belief that also goes back to ancient mystery religion. And the belief that particularly was perpetuated through Padua University, where the Venetian noble sons went, is that you either are born with the right to rule, that's the elites, or the right to be ruled. And that is us. So that's the way they see us. We are no more than what the cells we are made up of. And once Darwinism connected with Aristotelianism and under the Royal Society of Science owned by the elite, a whole different way of viewing ourselves, again, to take out our religion so they could change our culture and change the politics. Because we once thought we were made in the image of God rather than coming out of some primordial soup many millions of years ago. So now we have this problem with the way we reflect upon ourselves and our inalienable rights as we are having the propaganda from on high. So they just push the next button. And it's all done with the Hegelian dialectic that they need to get their thesis. So we have thesis, antithesis, and their synthesis, and whatever problem that might be. For example, with the COVID, where everyone's getting sick and we're going to call it COVID, so we're over here. Now we're all scared, so they swing it over here, and we must all have those poison needles to get to a healthy society. And it's all driven by fear. Everything is driven by fear, and they just push the next button. They give us a wee reprieve from the COVID scam, and they'll put us back onto climate change. And in fact, everything, I see it like a clothesline, a revolving clothesline. Everything stands on climate change. You go onto a lot of the WHO websites, you'll see that COVID is a sign of global warming. So we've lost our inalienable rights. But we don't think we have, and this is why. Because we have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and we think because the United Nations gives us rights, that we have rights. Any person that has inalienable rights under God needs no other person, no other establishment or organisation giving them what they already have. And the problem is with the United Nations, when they give us human rights, they're actually giving us privileges. It's a big con job. And you'll see here in the top there, recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in this world. Now that's their idea of freedom, their idea of justice, and their idea of peace. But I love this part, being members of the human family, because they can choose that dissenters are no longer part of the human family and put us into centres and strip us of that classification. Even the word human, you won't get that in the King James Bible. It's a hue of a man. We barely exist. So there's all that word trickery. But particularly with the mRNA, because we know this is genetically modifying us. It's been tested, this mRNA has been tested in courts in America, and it has been decreed that once we have that RNA in our DNA, we are patented. So we're really no longer human, if I can use that word. Now, it might have no bearing on us for 10, 20, 30, or even 40 years, but sooner or later, just like Monsanto did with GM seeds, poor little organic farmers getting that blown onto their farm and growing what became genetically modified seed because of the pollen, and these farmers lost in court. So it's setting the stage for us to no longer have any human rights. So firstly, our inalienable rights don't need anyone giving us rights. We've got them. And secondly, once we say, okay, God, I'll come over here to man's rights, we are going to have that carpet taken from us very, very quickly. And this all came out of the French Revolution, which was choreographed from the City of London, which is a square mile within Greater London. The City of London is not owned by Britain, it's owned by the Vatican, and it is their financial seat. And they did their dummy run for the French Revolution and what's known as the Gordon riots. And they got the model going there. There's plenty of evidence that it was funded from the City of London as well. So once we get through the French Revolution, it's a bit that Hegelian dialectic again. Although it was a Catholic country, people as individuals call themselves Christians. So we come over here and we destroy their Christian faith, and we make them all. Well, that was the goddess of reason came in. There was all the reason, temples of reason, and then they brought particularly France to a secular society. So they got their synthesis, and the plan was destroy people's belief in a creator God of the Bible. So when we look a little bit more closely into these, we find that it's covered in ancient mystery religion. We've got the Eye of Cyrus, the Eye of Lucifer there with the sun rays, because the Osiris, ancient mystery religion, is sun worship, S-U-N. We've got the Ouroboros, the snake biting its tail. That's order out of chaos. It's also a symbol for sun worship, and also about continually devouring society to gain what they're wanting, the elites are wanting. We've got the Phrygian hat, or the Jacobean hat as it was known through the French Revolution, and then the wreath-like, snake-like coils through the top, which is a symbolism of the snake. Fasciae over there, which comes from pagan Rome, because papal Rome is Rome. Pagan Rome died, papal Rome rose. Caesar became the Pope. Their ancient mystery gods got their Christian veil. Isis, Ishtar became Mary. Osiris became David. Pan, where we get our word, the god Pan, where we get our word panic from. He also is known as David. So they just got a new revamp. And this fasciae denoted absolute authority. And the centurions would have their servants carry that around, and everyone would know, you don't mess with that person. That person has ultimate authority, long as they come under the narrative of the day, of course, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then you've got the pillars there, Boam and Joachim, I think it is, if I've got my memory right there, which are the Masonic pillars. So where do we see that? Well, there's Mussolini. You'll see his fasciae each side of his balcony there, making it very clear to the people around that he has been given ultimate authority. Both Mussolini and Hitler were put in power by the Vatican, funded by the Vatican, and that is who they bow their power down to. Hitler's job was to bring in the one world religion that Catholicism really is. That's why we've got the swastika. It goes back to ancient mystery religion. So that was his job, and he did it fairly well. So we've got Sweden over here, and Denmark and France. You'll see the fasciae through all these symbols. Sometimes it's a spear, sometimes it's an axe. So they have been given the opportunity to govern their country with ultimate authority, but they need to bow the knee. And here we are at the Senate. You'll see the fasciae each side as well. Ultimate authority, but you need to bow the knee. And you'll see here, United States Senate, you've got the fasciae at the bottom, the Phrygian hat in the middle. So where did that Phrygian hat really become popularized in modern times? And that was in the French Revolution. This is Libertas, the goddess Libertas. That's the Statue of Liberty that was donated by French Masonic Masons to American Masonic Masons. And she is Libertas because she gives liberty, not freedom. And she became the goddess of prostitution, which is why we have that blue, which is also where we get our blue movies from. But this comes back to Mithraism, which is the core of ancient mystery religion for the esoteric knowledge of the elite, also in Roman Catholicism. Here's Mithraism, stabbing the bull. That is a symbol of Christianity, of Christ, and the unclean animals attacking as well. He's wearing his Phrygian hat. So anyone that wears a Phrygian hat has liberty as long as they bow the knee. So who are they bowing the knee to? This is up here is the black obelisk that's in the British Museum. This is a near take of the sketch just to make it a bit clearer. You can see the Phrygian hats. They have the liberty. These two in the middle, they will be servants or slaves. They have no Phrygian hats. They have no liberty. This emperor or leader here back in ancient BC times has been given the authority to be God on this earth by Marduk and Anu. And it's this God that they bow to. This is why the United Nations has the papacy or the Pope as part of their system now. It is the one world religion that's being brought in. We need to be bowing to him, just like the Dark Ages. If you do not bow to him, there is no liberty. So this is a little bit of history just to underpin how we've lost our inalienable rights. So the ancient mystery religion hand here, the core or the top grade of Mithraism is grade 7, where that person becomes a father. He presides over a congregation with Dagon. You can see the ancient Dagon dress and the modern dress there now. He has a congregation, an oblong room. He has the host, which is what you see the Catholic priests holding up as part of their sun worship in the monstrance that they put it into with the sun rays. And this is the esoteric knowledge of Catholicism. Up here, Pope Benedict's in the middle of his mitre there. He's got what we might think is David, but it isn't David, because David never played the pan flute. That's the god Pan. So you've got to ask yourself, if you really are a Christian organization or movement, why have you got ancient mystery religion gods around and on your regalia, as they often do? So here we are back here, of course, with the Pope that stood up and took his seat at the United Nations. And now everything that comes out of United Nations, everything that comes out of the World Economic Forum or any of the elites, the Pope also endorses. It doesn't matter what it is. If you've got any thoughts of what he has, the Pope, just put it in the search engine and up it will come. He supports everything. This is a Webster Tarpley. He is a historian, American historian. He's retired now, but I follow him. And he says, if you look at the documents from United Nations bureaucracy, especially the United Nations Development Programme, that's the Sustainable Development Goals, that's Agenda 2030, when they go through their practice of world government and their world court and their subpoena powers and their financial apparatus and their International Economic Warfare Bureau and these other things, if you compare that to the decrees and the edicts of Roman Emperor Diocletian of about 300 AD, you will find that the spirit and quite a number of the details behind these things are exactly the same. So how can it therefore be that supposedly at the culminating moments of the 21st century, the end of the second millennium, and right after 2,000 years of Christianity, and he goes on, that we're back to what we secured 500 years ago during the Reformation? This is an example here. This is the 1300s. When you look at some of the Jesuit writings, this is where they're taking us back to. This was the epitome of tyrannical papal power. This is a true drawing in real time of mums and dads being burnt at the stake. They were burnt for their crime of teaching their children the Lord's Prayer, because during the Dark Ages, as today, freedom of conscience is an insult to God and man. So how did we lose all this right, particularly freedom to believe philosophically what we wanted to believe, whether we call that a faith or a religion or a code? And it came in 606. This is a handsome brute here. He is Emperor Phocas of Constantinople. And he gave the papacy his spiritual power. So it's a bit amusing that one man can give another man spiritual power of the whole world, but that's what he did. And that is what that gold key is there. That's to remind us on flags and on documentation that the papacy has the spiritual power over the whole entire world. So once that means ideology, that means knowledge, that means anything that makes us who we are and gives us a belief system. So once we buy into that, then we can have governments that can bring out whatever they want and we don't blink an eyelid. They can destroy our industry, destroy farming. They can promote themselves on the tallest building in Dubai, and no one gets put on that without the Jesuits say so. All these what are really cultural changing events and documentation, because they've destroyed our religious base, easy to come out. And of course, we lose further unalienable rights. We've talked about the Hegelian dialectic and what that means. It's a crushing and a pressurizing from both sides and from up and down and from within. And it's all done on fair, so we'll look to the government to help us. That's everything that's happened in the last 200 or 300 years. The depressions, particularly in the early 1920s, when Wall Street flopped and fell, all choreographed, people's lives destroyed at a switch of a turn on of a switch, and fear came in, and that was the beginning of the American losing their true currency and moving into a debt economy through fear, pressured by this Hegelian dialectic. So if we don't come into line, if we're going to push back, it's going to look a little bit like this in New Zealand. This is Australia. Canada and Britain have done the same thing, now allowing foreign troops on their soil. Detention centres are being built in New Zealand. This is an Australian one. Billions of pounds are being built for several big detention centres in Britain. The elites are carrying on like a completely different parallel society to us. They don't care about what we have to say. They are getting ready to take us off the streets when they deem it right to do so. We know we've got foreign troops already in New Zealand, so we're poised. What are we going to do about it? Because as I say, there's no cavalry coming over those hills. When we left Britain in 2019, the Yellow Vests had been protesting for some time in France, and this was the casualty rate when we left. 2,448 people injured, 24 eyes were lost, over 10,000 in custody. It goes on and on and on. This is a people in France that want their sovereignty and independence. We know Macron's got in twice with rigged elections, and the people are not very impressed. But this is what happens when you push back, if you push back too late. Having said that, we saw that a little bit in Wellington anyway, didn't we? This is Catalonia in the, I can't remember if it was 2015, but somewhere around there. When Catalonia wanted to come out of the EU, they wanted to engage from Spain. They gave themselves lawful elections so that they could make those decisions, and in came the troops, foreign troops, against an unarmed citizenry. They came in with their truncheons and whatever else to destroy and disperse the people while they were having their referendum. Old ladies were chucked downstairs, glass doors on school halls or wherever they were having their elections were smashed. So they're coming in fast and furious. They are in their end game. There was a 1,000-year dark age. We had the Reformation headed by Martin Luther, who wasn't the first person to push through, but that we the people rallied under his cry for freedom, and just over 500 years ago we broke free from the tyranny of the papacy, and they have spent 500 years trying to claw us back into that one world religion and one world governing system. So we have to be very quick off the mark now. Now, if you're like me, you know, I've done everything. A couple of years ago, I did my oath and I sent it off to the barons in Scotland, and I thought, there we go, I'm under them now, that's all cool. But then they didn't want any more oaths sent to them, and they kind of shut down, so they're compromised. Then I did my affidavit, and I thought, cool, I still carry it with me. And that's gone out to, I believe you don't need to send it out to everyone, but mine went out to all these people a couple of years ago to make sure that they understood, although contract law was the only law in town, but I still was able to function within that commerce, but I was a independent flesh and blood being. And standing on common law, which I write about in the Straw Man chapter in We're Revolting. And I've also got my sea pass, so I've had that for a couple of years as well. But what I'm learning with all of these models of protection, which they should protect us, but we're in a time now in New Zealand where we're not in a democracy, so these things will no longer protect us. They may give us a little bit of relief, but they will not protect us. The Sea Pass works with Te Moana Nui a Kiwa, so it's the whole Pacific. It's not dealing specifically with us as in New Zealand. Also, they have embassies here in New Zealand, which begs the question, you know, where do you come from, because you don't have embassies in your own country. Now, I understand it's a sea pass to get us over international law, and maybe some of you will know that international law is the law of the sea that's come onto the land. But that sea is also trickery. SEA is also SEE, because the Pope calls himself the Holy See. And all this word trickery, it doesn't matter about the spelling, this is what it is. So although we say, oh, everything's contractual law, but I'd like to even say everything is a canon law, is Vatican law. It goes way back into BC times with Christchurch that designed how we might contract and make alliances, and then Justin with this Justinian model as well that really took a life of its own. It also comes from the Phoenicians way back, because if you see one of my other videos, you'll realize we go from the Canaanites to the Phoenicians, which just means where is the purple, because it was the nobles that fled from places like their cities. It'll come to me. Goodness, I can't believe I forgot that. Jericho, that's the name. And then from the Phoenicians, they had Carthage going there. We've got Fabian, where we get our Fabian society. They warred. Fabian came in and destroyed Carthage. You can see today now all their urns, Rockefeller, archaeological sites with all these babies, well, remains of babies in urns as they were being fed to Baal and Moloch in their sacrifices. Then the Phoenicians, they went up to Venice and they became the Venetians. From there, they traded in slavery and in commerce. And this is exactly what they do today. The elites have got no creativity. They just work with slavery. We're all debt slaves today, and with commerce. Once the Spanish got supremacy on the sea, the Venetians realized their days were numbered. So they looked for another swampy ground to set up shop, and that was in Holland. They started Deutsche Bank, which is a bank that funds all sorts of nefarious charities. From there, they realized that they could actually rule the English Channel if they just jumped over and set themselves up with the aristocracy in London, and that's what they did. We'll learn a little bit more about that later on today. So we're in a system that is against us. We are the enemy. And if we stay in this system, we will be fighting them for the next 100 years. With common law, it seems to me, it's totally needed at the moment because we've got to meet them at the coalface. But what it does is deals with me and my immediate problem, whether it's council, police, courts, or whatever. It deals with my immediate problem and gets me out of that strife. But if we were to think about changing to a jurisdiction, and here in New Zealand we've got Whakaputanga, which we'll go into more later on after lunch. But we can change jurisdiction. The Whakamaninga Māori government of Aotearoa New Tyranny. New Tyranny is French for new territory, or some people say it's French for New Zealand. This is a pathway to freedom. Those are inalienable rights that we've long lost. We can gain them back in a twinkling of an eye by changing jurisdiction. And jurisdiction is something very easily, we can do very easily because we're in the world of the internet, and we can do it, as I say, in the comfort of my own home, wearing my PJs, with my hot chocolate and my marshmallows floating. Changing jurisdiction is going to be our only way through the dilemma we're in. We still need common law to fight them at the gate. But if you consider it's like Whakaputanga is a historical and lawful de jure jurisdiction of New Zealand, so we're not creating anything new here. We're just finding it again, and we're stepping into it. And I believe that this is our way through. This will get us over the line, which I'll talk more about after lunch. So the Whakaputanga Māori government is made up of Māori and non-Māori. Some people say, oh, why has it got Māori there? I don't know if I like that. I had a guy, that was it. He refused to go any further because the word Māori was there. He was an immigrant into the country, and I don't know where he was from, but he was black. He wasn't a Caucasian, but he couldn't handle that word Māori, so he spat the dummy after talking to me personally, and he left straight away pretty much. We are in a Māori nation, so we've got to get over that. I suggested to him, in Scotland, we have the Scottish National Party in office right now in Scotland. I asked him, was that a problem for him? Actually, it wasn't, and it kind of took him off his guard a little bit. So his argument started to crumble somewhat. But we need to recognise we're in a Māori nation. The word government there as well. Some people say, oh, I'm not having a government. I'm not going. This is not a top-down heavy government that we are under right now. This is administrative or service government to the side. So it serves we the people. If we stand in our inalienable rights, we are answerable to God. That is it. We are the next authority. Then, because any government, any man-made institution is made by us, it cannot have authority over us. So then all these institutions come next. So it's not a government that we might think straight away in our minds that we're trading off one tyranny for another. Not at all. This government sits on the Whakaputanga Declaration. It sits on native customary law. Native customary law is the law of the land in New Zealand. Common law is the law of the land in the UK. It weaponises poorly, in my opinion, but doable for the short term. Customary law in New Zealand will take us into the future, and not just me as an individual in my immediate crisis with police or council or courts. This takes the whole nation forward. So the people down in Wellington are scared spitless. They're pretending that they don't really recognise it, and they're pretending that it's a nothing burger, but it is something that they are very fearful of. So both these jurisdictions are law of the land. They're just appropriate in different countries. They both sit on the law of God. So they, in effect, are, brothers, I suppose. It's just that one better fits the Magna Carta and one better fits Whakaputanga. So I think I'll just kind of leave it there for a minute, and if open it up, because we have got time now for a few questions. I will be going into this a lot more, so you're probably thinking, oh, there's lots of gaps. We can go into this a bit more, but if there are any, we've got about, 10, 15 minutes. If there are questions, we can answer them.
Why would the incumbent government respect an alternative jurisdiction?
Well, they don't, but it's not about respect.
Okay, well, enable them to have autonomy.
Well, they are fighting hammer and tooth for that. That's what Hei Pūpō was out. They're bringing out all their little documents and doing as many things as they can to deflect from Hei Whakaputanga. But I guess at the end of the day, it's a numbers game. Hei Whakaputanga is our authority in New Zealand. End of story. There are different movements underneath that. The Whakaputanga Māori government is, from what we hear and we know, but what we also hear from Kaumātua that have been sitting on some of our Zooms, we are years ahead of any other expression or movement under that. So they don't want to recognise us. But they will have to as our numbers grow. So that authority is assured, whether it's only one person or thousands, but the numbers that we can enrol will gain the Whakaputanga Māori government's strength. Then they strengthen us in our communities and us as individuals. And we strengthen them back the way. It's a kind of an alliance, as it were. If we say, I'm standing under Hei Whakaputanga and my own sovereignty and my own mana, good luck. We saw how well that went in Russia, as everyone was taken to the gulags, and also China. So, no, they don't have to respect it, but as we grow, they'll have to accommodate for us, because this is not their jurisdiction. Yeah. Yeah, could you please, this is Glenn. You best there, Glenn, because this mic is less shareable.
Okay, Antoinette and I have worked together for a couple of years without spending an awful lot of time talking on this particular subject. I was a senior manager in government, and they put us through training on their response to Whakaputanga. And what's actually happened, I won't tell you the whole long story, but what actually happened is it was brought to their attention that this was a valid document, and so Crown Law looked into how they should respond to it and kicked the can down the road as long as they possibly could, almost 25 years. They procrastinated before and coming to a ruling, and the ruling they came to was it is a valid document, it stands under international law, and in fact they are illegitimate, and this is the legitimate government of New Zealand. And so then the government made an announcement that quietly, wasn't front page news, made an announcement that they were going to transition to a handover in 2040. And they should have immediately just walked out. There's no reason to procrastinate that long. For those of you that understand the UN Agenda 2030, by 2030 there'll be a one world government. And so they know that if they say we're going to do it in 2040, they never have to do it. However, I'll jump onto one other thing you said too. The word Māori, for those of you there'll be a fair few here are Christian or at least understand what hermeneutic studies are. That's where you study what was being said by the person at the time they said it with the understanding of how it be received by the people. What were the cultural significances of what was said? What did the language mean at that time? How was it received and understood? When Henry Williams worked with, and Octavius Hadfield, Reverend Brown, who was a lawyer, and others, worked with the groups of chiefs to write He Whakaputanga, they had a good understanding of the cultural meaning of things at the time, so they used a lot of the cultural terminology of the time. So when they said united tribes, they mean the united people groups, not the actual existing tribes there were at the time. So it did mean the tribes that existed at the time, but if you read He Whakaputanga, it says all those living here, all those coming to live here, which is everyone that's come here ever since. So they included those people as tribes. They even said those coming to trade, which is one we'd want to be very careful of and control, because you don't want people that have no real interest in this country dictating what might happen here. But so they were using language of the time to describe something bigger than what it might be understood to mean if you didn't do a full study of what they were saying. When they used the word Māori, they were using the all-encompassing meaning of it, which is a people from a place, a people of a place. It can also mean a natural person. So when you apply it like that and realise that they were also describing those that are coming to settle here, it's all inclusive. They set up a federation. Williams had fought in the War of 1812 in America and had seen federations in operation and realised that they're a really good way to operate when you've got strong individual groups. So the federations are made up of generally independent nations that have decided to work together. So the European Union is a federation, the United Nations is a federation, the United States and Australia are federations, which are independent states, nation states, that come together to work as a whole. And so in New Zealand, we've got the United Tribes, which can be Ngāi Tahu and it can be Tūwharetau and the rest of them like that, but it can be the people of Christchurch or whatever else you decide it might be. And so there are already meningas, states, tribes, however you want to describe them, around New Zealand that have been formed and represent special interest groups or people groups around New Zealand. So Māori is all of us when you take it in that full meaning of the word. Yeah, happy to answer any other questions there. Yeah.
My understanding of Maori from Ratner's point of view is Re is descendant, Re, O is of, and Ma is what colour?
Right.
So it means global.
Yeah, everything, everywhere. Yeah, so it's a poetic language.
Yes, it is.
So you can imply meanings, you can draw meanings, so you can make it quite big.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you very much, Glenn. Right, lunch. Well, we'll leave it there, and it gives us a good hour. So maybe, reconvene at 1. And, beg your pardon.
Hi. There's one other thing that I'd like to talk about, and that is the Te Ture Whenua Maori Land Act 1993. And in the after that, that was written by 3 Privy Council law lords, and one of them was Hauhepa
That's
Mapedia.
right.
And in the regulations that they added to that in 1995, it sets out that, first of all, it sets out that we can form Maori corporations, and they have the right to have their own courts, to be a side of the police, and be a side of having to pay taxes under IRD. And that's entrenched in law. It's sat for 10 years without being challenged, and so therefore it is fully entrenched in New Zealand law. And it's a people-up, community-based structure, and that's available to all of us to join as well. And under Section 271 of the Te Ture Maori, I missed out a word, the Te Ture Whenua Maori Land Act 1993, under Section 271, no one is permitted to inquire into any business of any Maori incorporation or any of the shareholders of a Maori incorporation. And so again, it's a form of being able to educate the police that they have no right to stop any vehicle or to stop any person or to inquire into any community of
Right.
people who are living under that system.
Right. So have you got a question, or?
No, I'm just wanting to build on what we've been talking about.
Oh, right. Well, I can build on that in another session. Anything that really is after 1986 has got a big question mark on it, because that's when legislations and acts came into place. And so when we talk about law, it's not necessarily law anymore. Imperial law was before that, with the coup in the middle of the night by Labour and National, I guess, when they took the flesh and blood monarch out of the situation and put in Her Majesty the Queen and Right of New Zealand. So anything after that time, I would be very dubious about, because that is controlled down in Wellington. So, if people want to head down that track, do your due diligence. They can put a legislation in 1995 or whatever, and they can pull it out in 2025. So that is the problem, that it's a bit of a house of cards, where Hei Whakaputanga is the de jure governing system of the land. So we don't have to play their game anymore. We just push them out of town. And this is what I guess I'm saying with common law or whatever act, or I'm familiar with the Whenua Act there, that really is built on corporation side of things, because
Hei Whakaputanga.
sorry?
It's absolutely the basis of it is the Hei Whakaputanga.
Yes. Okay. Well, I guess I haven't got the knowledge to get right down and fight the particulars on that, or argue the particulars on that. I wouldn't touch it with a barge pole, because it is, again, after 1986. There are a lot of things that sit on Hei Whakaputanga, but it doesn't really mean that it has the teeth that Hei Whakaputanga gives us. In the Whakamaninga Māori government, if something is incorporated, we won't touch it with a barge pole, because that can be dictated down in Wellington, because it moves into trust law and other things that I'm not a lawyer, so I can't speak into today. But we sit purely on the declaration. That is our constitution. We sit on law. We do not sit on any legislations. But I know the Whenua 1993 was because they destroyed in 1986 our constitution, our 1852 constitution. And that's when Whakaputanga, or excuse my pronunciation, came back. He was over in Britain, the House of Lords, and he came back to New Zealand to try and pull back that 1852 constitution as best he could. It was a poor reflection, but it did a ways to collecting back a certain amount of authority in Māoridom. But so we're not going there. We go straight back to 1835 and we sit solidly on that. And if we, with Glenn, what are they contesting? They're contesting, well, not contesting, but bearing as best they can and kicking down the road the actual declaration. So if we want to put ourselves in a safe place going forward, we need to step back to that declaration that went out to over 50 countries in the world in real time, not giving Māori or New Zealand sovereignty and independence, but declaring that they already had it. So we just try and keep things nice and tidy and clear. We're not interested in battling corporations, incorporations, whoever's dealt with it. Iwi are incorporated, every marae is incorporated. So we have to be really careful that we're not, as a Whakamaninga Māori government, or any of us standing under He Whakaputanga, in that regard. I mean, we are dual citizens, so if you're getting benefits or anything from the corporation, that carries on. I'm not talking about that aspect. But we, as a independent jurisdiction, cannot afford to have a foot on any corporation or incorporation. So I guess, that's up to the individual, but as our movement, and our movement is a real threat to Wellington, and we'll talk more about that in this afternoon's presentation. It's an exciting time, and really, thank you. And really, we need now to rise up if we get a vision for this jurisdiction. And again, later on, I'll be talking about what it looks like now, what it looks like as we transition, and what it will look like. Because once we get there, we're right back to where we were with our inalienable rights. We don't need to be worrying, but at the moment there is a battle that needs to be had, but it's a battle we can win if people get the vision. It is lunch. One more quick question.
How do you use this as remedy when interacting with the corporation with your issues today?
We'll be talking about that this afternoon, yeah. Common law is part of that. The remedy is that we are the de jure, and we've got it. We just need to strengthen that with enrolments. That's there, that's assured, that's solid. While we're growing, we'll talk about that later on, but as we're growing, we will be using common law because that's the only language that they will listen to at the moment. But it's weaponizing it. Now, I don't want my children in 20 years' time to still be having to weaponize common law. I don't want my grandchildren in 60 years' time still having to battle. We can deal with this under He Whakaputanga right now, and we can deal with it within months if people get a vision for it. And it's not, you don't come under this government, you enroll through this government into a different jurisdiction. So we'll talk all about that and what the government already brings to the table. And how it's working with us and how it strengthens us as individuals and strengthens us as communities, as hapu. But we'll stop now. Thank you once again. We'll see you after.